welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I am here with poet Lynne Bronstein, and she has a new collection out, everybody, that's called Nasty Girls. I want to jump in with that. Look at that beautiful book, folks. Wow. So I guess let's just dive right into it and let me know kind of how the book got started. Is it a collection of poems from over several years? Is it a design, like a theme? What are you working with there?
What happened was about 5 years ago, when I was recuperating from surgery, I started writing a series of poems. There was one I had written earlier than the rest of them. And I thought, well, I'm going to write more of these. They were all monologues by historical women from different periods of history. The link was that they were all women who had become the subject of scandal, usually about their sex lives, sometimes about other issues. There was once a book in the early 70s called The Nympho and Other Maniacs by Irving Wallace, which annoys me in some ways because he was very old-fashioned, and you can see that in the way he describes these women. But his mission was to describe, I think it was about 27 or 28 women from history who were the subject of sex scandals. And some of his accounts of these women inspired some of the poems in these books. Some of them are based on detailed biographies. So it goes from Julia, the daughter of Augustus Caesar, who was banished from Rome and had to live on a very small island about the size of a city block or less, with no men except very old men, because she had slept around too much. And her father, although of course, like all men in Rome, he slept around, but he was trying to promote chastity and the family, and she was ruining that. And so he just banished her, and she had to live out the rest of her life on that island. And then we get other women in different periods of history up till the early 20th century. I didn't want to do anybody who still lives, because if people are still living, they have their own story to tell, and also you run into legal problems. And even with some people who have been dead for a while but died recently, because I have a poem about several silent movie actresses who were also had involved in scandal, and I was very cautious in describing them or having them describe themselves, because in some cases we don't know exactly what happened with them.
Mm.
But these are all monologues, my fantasy of what they might have said if they had written poems about their lives. And so I'm going to read one here by one of the lesser known women. Her name is not that well known to a lot of people, and people have asked me, who was she? This was a French woman from the Cavalier period named Julie d'Aubigy. She was a swordswoman. She was as skilled with a sword as any of the male cavaliers of the time. She often cross-dressed as a man. She had affairs with both men and women. And she was also an actress on the stage at one point, where she was known as de Maupin. And later on in the 19th century, the writer Théophile Gautier wrote a novel called Mademoiselle de Maupin, which was roughly based on her life and fantasies of her sexual exploits, and the possibility that some people may have been confused about her identity. So this is the poem of Julie d'Aubigy. What a life I had. I got to do it all. I learned dancing, singing, and above all, fencing. My skill with a sword was incredible. I loved the way it felt to thrust that sword. And what, you may ask, did that make me? Men thrust into me, and I loved that feeling too. But I loved to feel the softness of a young girl's hair, her skin, her gentle lips on mine. My first real love, I was still very young. Her parents tried to hide her from me, placing her in a convent. I went to the convent too. For me, it was always, if I must don a disguise, I will. I became a postulant at the same convent. Newsflash, the convent caught fire. My love's room was where the flames licked, at the bed in which lay the body of a dead nun. We two escaped. They put out a warrant for my arrest, charged with arson, kidnapping, body snatching, failing to appear in court, and they attributed all this crime to a man. The punishment for the crimes was death by fire. Many years went by. I fought many duels. I was an opera star and the mistress of many men. Sometimes I dressed like a man. Sometimes I was dressed like a man, but said I was a woman. Sometimes I made love to women. Sometimes I was decidedly my own woman. Feeling sad when I lost the last one, who had the softness and perfume that reminded me of the first one. I could not go on. I had lived so much my sword became blunted. I fought my last duel with myself. Who indeed was I? Was I Julie or Le Maupin, or some young man with a fiery sword? I was all in at age 33. My grave is unknown. The writer Gautier took inspiration from my life, decided that my life illustrated the idea. All is love, and any love is all love.
Wow, that's great. I guess I have to ask, when you were putting this together, was there anything that you stayed away from? Was there anyone that was too taboo, or maybe you felt like someone had been like well-worn territory with some of these women?
Like I say, I wasn't going to do anyone still alive because some people might pick this up and say, "Whoa, you didn't do something, say, on Monica Lewinsky." Well, she is still alive, and I think that is pretty touchy. Like I say, I was pretty hesitant to go into poetry about some women we are very uncertain about, and I felt safe with most of them up to the end of the 19th century. The one that is called The Silent Girls deals with uh, Mary Miles Minter, a silent movie star who is sometimes thought to have murdered a director, and we don't know for sure if she did or not. Mabel Normand, who was also connected with the death of that director, but she also was said to have really used a lot of cocaine. Clara Bow, who is supposed to be legendary for all sorts of weird sexual exploits, and Virginia Rappe, the young woman who tragically died at a party that Fatty Arbuckle threw, and we still don't know for sure how that happened. And as a matter of fact, when I used to write book reviews for the Los Angeles Times, this is absolutely true, they sent me instructions on how to write a book review for the Los Angeles Times, and they had what I used to like to call the Virginia Rappe clause, because they used her as an example of somebody who, if you're reviewing a book about them, and the author of the book made some allegation about their life, and you don't know if it's true, but you only know that it's the author's allegation, you must put according to the author, and that way you avoid any legal challenges. And since I've been a journalist for much of my life too, I have learned, sometimes learned the hard way, that you have to be very careful about libel. And I think even in fiction and poetry, you have to have that responsibility.
Mhm.
So you have to do your research to the best of your ability. You never know what somebody may come up with. They may be somebody who said, "I'm related to that person," and you don't know them. But to the best of your ability, you have to know your territory and write about what you know happened, and you can write about what you think may happen. And you know the disclaimer that you always see in movies: the person and persons in this film are completely fictitious, no resemblance to anybody living or dead is intended. Maybe I should put that in the book, but I think people can figure it out for themselves. And
Well,
yes,
that's
the pictures of the women are on the front here, or most of the women anyway. Uh, my housemate James Everett Jones, a great poet in his own right and entrepreneur, and graphics person, helped me put this cover together. We found the pictures and he designed it.
great. It's great. Why don't we have you read another one, and then I'll ask you a few more questions here about just kind of the early days and you kind of getting into poetry and the open mic. So go ahead if you have another one you want to read there.
Who else? Well, I like this one. I guess I'm still going with the French ones. Marie de Plessis was a courtesan in 19th century Paris who was the inspiration for the Dama Camellia, the Lady of the Camellias, and the opera La Traviata, who was known to wear a camellia all the time into her dress. And she died at the age of 23 of tuberculosis. And this is her story based on an anecdote about somebody who once bought her some French fries. No more rice gruel, fruit salad, almond milk, and syrup of fern. I want my frites. I remember looking at bags of frites at a vendor's stall. It was near the Pont Neuf, nighttime in Paris. I was 15. I had run away, good riddance, from my awful drunk of a father and the dirty, drooling old fool to whom my father sold me. From being plain Alphonsine country girl, laundress, umbrella worker, and amateur whore. Ahead of me lay Paris, city of cafes and rustling silks, where I would rule at the age of 20. I feel dry in my throat, dizzy, must lie down for a while. The doctors will shake their heads. You must rest, they will say. You must refrain from what irritates. No red meat, no coarse bread, no spices, no salt. But they prescribe laudanum, leeches, quinine, opium patches, snail syrup. Their medicines are inane. I hear everyone telling me, refrain, be good. Do not survive by killing yourself. Try to get by the good way. Don't sleep with men. I won't hear or heed them. I want to stay up all night. I want to transcend society's judgment. I want to be the nobility I stole by using the name Duplessis. I want to be the princess, and then to abolish nobility, be free in a true Paris of liberté, guérite, and salarie. I won't need to be exploited and sold to the public in my ex-lover's novel. I want to be the girl who does just what she wants and does not have to die to be immortal. I will live to be 85, travel in my coach with the curtains up. I will sing like my future operatic self, but with no cough. And forget about the camellias. I will be the lady of freaks, like the ones I munched on, bought by a gentleman for a runaway teen on a Paris night so long ago.
Excellent. I like it. I like it a lot. I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you're originally from New York.
New York City.
Okay.
I was born in the Bronx. The Yankees.
So I guess let the folks know that are watching. Did you start doing readings and open mics in New York, or was that something more when you got to LA?
I wrote poetry from an early age, but I really didn't even know about a poetry scene in New York. In the late 60s, I was hung up on becoming a rock star. I was hung up on becoming another Joni Mitchell or Laura Nyro, and I was writing songs and going to open mics at clubs and busking in Central Park. But I completely ignored the poetry scene. And it wasn't until I got out here to LA that I started discovering readings. And actually, the first poet I ever met was Charles Bukowski, because he and I were both writing for the same newspaper, the Los Angeles Free Press. And a second poet I met was Michael C. Ford. And I think he really kind of brought me in because I started attending some readings. I heard from him about Beyond Baroque. I started going there. I started doing some readings around town, and that was in the 70s. And it was tough going in those days. Sometimes the room was a pretty tough place.
Well, that brings me to another question, which was because I'm really interested about that time, and whenever anyone's kind of starting out, was there people in your circle or in your life in that time involved with the open mics that were kind of nice in the sense that they would say, well, here are the don'ts and here are the do's. So was there anyone kind of helping you along and kind of giving you guidelines, or was it just kind of like thrown to the lions kind of thing?
Well, there were always people who could give you guidelines. You know, there were workshops, and I didn't especially like the workshops that seemed to be available at that time. Although I had a really long relationship with Beyond Baroque and things are great with them and me right now. Back in the early days, when I was going there, their workshop was a tough place to go to. I didn't like the methods being used there. And they didn't really give you a whole lot of guidance about how to appear at the open mic. They only had 5 slots. And then the featured reader came on, and everybody competed for the 5 slots. Twice as many people would sign up. And if you didn't get on, you know, you didn't get on, but they told you to come back the following week. So it was a matter of how determined you were that got you on. And I just started learning through experience what would work and what didn't work, you know, kind of how to read the room, how to work the room. Now, things didn't always work out. I just did the best that I could. But I've had a long, long journey in the poetry scene. I've gone in and out of it. During the 80s, I wasn't in it very much. I came back in the 90s and it was all new people. I had to meet everybody all over again, start all over again. And I self-published most of my books. Nasty Girls is published by Four Feathers Press that Todd Kingfisher Campbell does. My previous four books were all done by me. I had to do all the work on them. I had to promote them myself. And sometimes I felt that the small press people, especially the self-published, don't get a whole lot of help. They don't get a whole lot of notice.
That's true. It's a lot of self-promotion. I am curious. I've had this situation happen, and I'm curious if it's happened to you as well, where you're at an open mic or you're at a reading, and you have a piece, and you're really hot to read it, and you're really excited, and you're reading it, and it's just dead silence, and you're thinking, "Oh God, I've just died a death up here. This is terrible." But then later, whether you're going out with a group of people, to a restaurant or something after the reading, or just like in the lobby of a bookstore or wherever it took place, and then invariably you'll have a few people come to you and say, like, I was so enraptured by that. I didn't want to miss a word. I didn't want to clap. So I'm kind of curious if you had that experience where you think, oh God, I totally bombed this and screwed it up. And then somebody comes up later and they said, no, that was my favorite.
Yeah,
Have you
that
had that?
happens. I don't know that I've ever done something where there was complete silence. Sometimes I get the feeling, yeah, they don't get what I'm talking about, and they're just applauding politely. And then yes, then later on there will be somebody who says, "Oh, I really like that." And sometimes I can't tell if there's even anybody out there. Sometimes they turn out the lights depending on the venue, and you maybe can't
You're
see
doing one of these
there.
things
And
like, is anyone alive?
it's best to not do that. Oh, it's also best to not look at them. I did a reading once where it was not a very large space, and I could see people I knew in the front row. Somebody I knew was in the front row, and he was making the most horrible grimaces all through my reading. And I thought, what? I thought this guy liked me. What's wrong? Turned out he was having a stomach problem. That had nothing to do with me.
Oh my gosh. I remember one time at the Rap Saloon, this was like 15 years ago or more. I remember I was doing the feature there and I was playing guitar, and I was going to, do some poems too. But this guy came and sat right in front of me in the front row and just started having a conversation with me. I'm like, oh, my brother has a guitar just like that. And like, oh, what kind of gauge string? And I'm playing a song and I'm singing and I'm going like, oh, is he talking to me like the whole time? And then as soon as I'd stop playing a song, then he would stop talking. And then I'd start playing another song, and then he would say, like, that reminds me of this song. I'm like, oh my God. So I'm kind of curious in your experience. Have you had any experience with hecklers and how you've handled that?
Oh, I've been lucky that I haven't had a whole lot of heckling. And I just want to say this offhand. This person is on the record as having admitted that this happened. But somebody whom I've admired for years, although she doesn't do poetry very often these days, she does many other things, but she's been involved in music and belly dancing and tarot card readings. Pleasant Gayman. She's kind of an LA legend in the punk scene.
Hmm.
She claims that one time when she had a heckler, she told him to come up to the performance area, have him lie down on the floor, and then she went and sat on his face and continued her poetry reading. This is a very risky thing to do, but I
Right?
admire.
That could have gone bad really
I
easily.
know, but I admire her so much for having had the guts to do that with a heckler. I have a
Yeah.
feeling it's probably illegal to do that. You can really get in trouble. Uh,
Yeah.
I had fantasized about, well, what would I do? I told somebody the other day, if I were to hear somebody hiss at me, I'd probably tell them, well, geese hiss, snakes hiss, cats hiss, and idiots hiss. So which one are you?
That's great. I think comedians almost have it easier because you're supposed to be telling funny stories and then somebody interrupts or they're a jackass and then you have to kind of put them in their place. So these people have like these kind of things stored up. And I think one of my favorites was Steve Martin saying like, yeah, I remember my first beer because somebody interrupted him and was going, whoa. And he was going, oh yeah, I remember. Yep, he's drunk. I remember my first beer. There were a couple other ones, but I am curious about your experiences if you have read and performed in cities outside of Los Angeles and how you would contrast and compare your experiences if you have, performed outside of LA.
I've performed in a number of places, including San Diego, New York City, up in San Luis Obispo. Oh, I'll tell you an interesting contrast. This was in the 90s. I did a reading here in LA for the Penn organization. That's a writers organization. And it was in a Barnes and Noble bookstore. It was very formal. And I read some poetry and even told a poetry joke, or at least a literary joke. And the audience sat there very stiffly. I had the feeling they weren't sure how to react to a poetry reading. So they were just dead wood, just very polite applause. And I know I felt that discouragement, like I'm not getting through them. I did the same exact set in San Luis Obispo at the San Luis Obispo Poetry Festival, and I killed, as they would say in comedy. You know, they laughed at everything, the joke, the poems that were funny. So a lot does depend on your audience.
It's unbelievable, right?
So, oh, look who's guest star has just entered. This is Khaleesi.
Hi, Khaleesi. Little video bomb there.
I mangled your name in an email the other day because she stepped on the keyboard. And now she's usually camera shy.
Oh,
But she likes to come up here when I'm doing something here. So you're getting to have a little glimpse of it.
okay. Yeah, she's just curious and or jealous. So I guess tell me a little bit about the anthology that you have the story published in. I think the folks would like to hear about that.
All right. Well, I do write fiction also. And the last few years, I've been getting into trying to write crime fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I belong to an organization called Sisters in Crime, which is a national organization, has a Los Angeles chapter. And there's also a San Diego chapter that's much smaller, but they feel that they're kin with the LA chapter. So when they were putting out an anthology last year, they said that people in the LA chapter, Sisters in Crime, could submit to their anthology too. And the result was they accepted one of my stories. And this past summer, I went to a big convention called VoucherCon, which is held in a different city every year, but it was held this past year in San Diego, and it's a convention for crime and mystery writers. And we had our launch party for the anthology, which is called Crime Under the Sun. It is available on Amazon. And I have a story in it called The One Who Was Good, which is about a group of teenage girls who are, you know, wealthy, privileged teenage girls with nothing to do. So they decide to have a group in which their ringleader tells them to commit crimes, to start with small ones and escalate to bigger ones. They draw lots to find out which crime each one of them will commit. And then it becomes a little bit difficult to commit these crimes. And I can't believe I wrote this story. It gets to be kind of grisly at the end.
But
and then
that's great, you know?
I couldn't believe it when it was accepted because there were 3 editors and they're pretty big time. Now, Naomi Hirahara is a well-known crime fiction writer, Matt Coyle, who is becoming really well-known, and he's from the San Diego area. And a 3rd editor, oh darn, I have the book right here, I forgot her name, but they all accepted the story, liked the story, and it's in there. And I feel, I really feel like a professional at being in there. I've also been in another Sisters in Crime anthology called Last Resort that came out in 2017. And I wrote a story that I was able to sell to National Public Radio. It was a Hanukkah story, which they run on a program. I don't know if they run it every year, but they ran it in 2018, and it is archived. The story called The Magic Candles. Mm-hmm. And people can go to NPR's archives and look it up.
Excellent.
It's to listen to.
Well, congratulations on that. And before I forget, let's have you read another poem. If you want to select another one from the Nasty Girls collection there, I think that the folks would love to hear another one. If you've got one that you particularly hot to read today.
I do have a couple of other things I thought I would read besides this, but I want to read something that is absolutely silly, but just as an example of what else I do. Mm-hmm. Let's see, where is it? I'm looking for it. I have to call it up. Oh, here it is. It's not coming up very well. Okay, here it is. Well, this is a silly poem that I wrote because one of my big hobbies is classic animation. And I was looking for some very old 1930s cartoons, and I found one in which the contents of a ship, the various merchandise, fell into the ocean, and the fish were pulling around with these human artifacts. And one fish swallowed a radio. seriously. And what happened to the fish, I felt like putting it in a poem. You could say it's an ekphrastic poem because it just tries to describe what this looked like when the fish swallowed the radio. So this is simply called Fish Swallows 1930s Radio. Ow, what sensations! Killer still at large. The sounds are so loud and they rumble inside me. What is that voice? The shadow knows. Who? What? Where? Time marches on. There are ghosts within me. Voices poke at me from the inside out. I can't get rid of this crowd. Gunshots, explosions. I have to live every argument, every battle. 3 chimes in a row. Dum, dum, dum. Be quiet, I whisper to whoever this is. Stop killing. Stop living. Stop moving around. I can't birth you. I can't expel you. I don't know if I can learn from you. Brought to you by our sponsor. I want to live in just my world, not this one you are bringing to me. War has begun. I am gasping for breath, as if air invaded my gills. I do not want this war. Oh, heart, be a hand and turn the off knob now.
Mhm. That's great. I really enjoyed that. That was great. Um, I guess I'll take a turn here and I'll say, with you bringing up that most recent poem there that you just read, and I guess I wanted to ask, with the writing that you've done, do you feel like there's something that you haven't tried to tackle yet, or there are some other kind of projects that you want to see get off the ground that maybe aren't necessarily stories or poems? Is there something else that you would kind of have a burning desire to get out there, another a novel or a play or things like of that nature? Is there something else that you are trying to get out there in the world?
Yeah, I've done pretty much almost every type of writing except a full-length screenplay. I've adapted a couple of my stories into short film scripts, and I was attending a program during the pandemic. It was on Zoom where we were submitting short film scripts, and people were doing them as staged readings. So my scripts got read, and I got to kind of hear what they'd sound like. I would like to write a full-length script, possibly based an expansion of one of the stories. And I did write novels in my youth. I even had an agent at one point and didn't get my novels published, but I do want to write another complete novel.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I look forward to that. I guess as we wrap it up here, I wanted to ask you, so much has changed, especially in the last 2 to 3 years in terms of what poetry or open mics or readings look like, how they're presented. Is there some kind of advice you would offer to someone who's in high school, college, just kind of starting out, do's and don'ts, and what kind of advice you might offer to new aspiring writers?
That's tough. It's hard for me to compare the way things were when I started out to the way things are now. One thing that was very different when I started out was that there were plenty of venues that would actually pay you. And today, good luck finding someone who will pay you anything beyond maybe a skimpy $10, which doesn't buy what it bought back in 1970 when I was starting out. So I'd have to advise young writers to kind of be prepared to have a way of surviving other than writing, which they always told me to do too, and I had to also. But also, try to hold out for getting the best deal that you can once you are getting to be an accomplished writer. But I'd say that people should just write. Uh, Workshops and classes will come to the aid of people who need them. Some people do have the gift of being able to write and not need a lot of instruction. Not everybody does. Not everybody will know that that's what they need. I think people will discover their level. They'll discover when they need to go to a class, when they need a mentor. I kind of wish now that when I was younger, I had at least found some better mentors than I did. My mentors were kind of a long distance. I liked certain writers and read them and followed whatever advice they used to give out that's like this, but I didn't have enough people around me who were giving me the right guidance when I was younger. But try to find somebody who would be a good mentor if that's what you need. But I also would have to quote what I actually heard a well-known movie director advise somebody once in regard to screenplays. If you really know what you want to write, just sit down and write it and don't worry about it. Later on comes the marketing, later on maybe comes the revising, but just write. And just write whatever comes to your mind. If you feel like you're stuck and blocked, just get a blank notebook or just go on a Microsoft Word document and just write whatever is in your head. Keep going, because eventually something is going to come out of it. That is, if you have the gift. If you don't, you'll find out sooner or later. But if you're driven, and you really do have to be driven, you have to continue to do this when you get tons of rejections and when people tell you you should give up. Because really, that's the other thing I learned as a young person from somebody who was another distant mentor, Harlan Ellison, who was a very successful writer. But he once said that write anything that you have to write. If you have to just write blurbs, if you just have to write newspaper articles, if you just have to write the copy on a cereal box or whatever, just write it, because what writers are really pushing is their courage. And that's the thing.
That's great. That's true. That's true. One thing I try to tell people too is that you're going to get 70 to 80 to 90% rejections for all the submissions that you sent out. But if you're like me, and sometimes you get a little bit of a too pointed of a rejection letter, and I'm the kind of person that I say, oh yeah, and then I'll go into something else I have finished, and that'll weirdly motivate me to turn out something. But as we wrap it up here, I wanted you to, I guess, just give you a couple seconds here to let the folks know where they can find your work online, or where you'd like them to be directed to online.
Well, online, like I said, the Crime Under the Sun is available on Amazon. My book at the present time is not available on Amazon. It is available at the Beyond Baroque bookstore and at another store called All Power Books. Also, if people are on Facebook, they can message me if they're interested in a book, and I can arrange for an exchange of book and money if they will just message me on Facebook. I'm not sure that I should give out my email here, but they can give me that.
Probably not, but I wanted to thank Lynne for coming on the show. This has been a long time in the works. I wanted to thank Khaleesi for making a nice little cameo there. That was well appreciated. So once again, thank you so much. I think everybody's going to like Nasty Girls, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.